gone to see a movie that everyone says is the best, and then you go and see it and say, I don't get it. So expectations have a lot to do with it, because it changes your attitude, right? You have that expectation, and then it's not fulfilled for one reason or another because we have these different preferences. And previous experience influences how we listen and appreciate certain things. So if you had a song played to you when you were a little kid over and over and over again, and you have wonderful memories of being with your family when that song was playing, you might love that song, and somebody else might want to rip their hair out. Like, I don't know, has anyone here been to Disneyland in California where they have It's a Small, Small World? Do they have that in Florida too?
Yes,
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, that's one of those things where I could rip my hair out. Absolutely. But you put a 5-year-old on there, right? They love it. So that's a good example of the differences in appreciative listening. Sometimes things are, like I said, they're connected to memory, and so we have an expectation of what that's going to be. Then we have critical listening. This is the type of listening utilized in the job, in the community, at service clubs, at places of worship, in the family, in school. Critical listening is essential in order to evaluate and form an opinion. So if you're working on a team on some new concept for the school, or when you work on curriculum, is a good example. You need to have critical listening because you're working on a team, you're coming up with a new idea, and it has a very important reason that you're doing that. It's something that's going to be utilized in the future by many, many people. And if you don't have critical listening skills, then you can't form a very good opinion or evaluate what other people on the team are saying. This is when it becomes really important to leave the person out of who's saying it and concentrate on what is being said. And sometimes in teams this is very difficult because you're on a team, you've got somebody on your team you don't particularly work well with, but now you're working on something that's very important. We'll talk about this a little later, but it is critical to leave the person out and leave the information in. With critical listening skills, you can filter through the strengths and the weaknesses because you're hearing everything. Again, it takes a huge amount of responsibility on the part of the listener to do this. And again, later we're going to talk about, when we talk about the art of response, what things block us from listening. There's a whole slew of things that are almost automatic when we listen to people, especially people we don't particularly like. And, you know, you're going to have that in a large group, sometimes even in a small group. So it requires great effort on your part to get beyond that so you can get the information, the critical information that you need when you're making big decisions. Critical listening is what you need because you are analyzing, you're gathering information, you're analyzing, you're making decisions. And so, again, it's just very important to get beyond your own biases so that you can listen. These are the attributes of critical listening, and I have up there, thank you, Aristotle, because he's the one who came up with these. Ethos, logos, and pathos. Bless you.
Thank you.
Ethos has to do with the speaker credibility, whether they have expertise and whether you see them as being trustworthy. someone can be an expert in their field, but they may have just read an article about them in the newspaper, and so it clouds how you filter their information. Logos has to do with logical arguments. You're looking for speakers who are giving you specific information, and you want them to be able to tie it all together. So one of the things I do in my workshops is I give you information, and then I give you opportunities to utilize that information and practice while we're in the workshop, so that when you go out into the big world, you have some practice already and things you might want to change. And the last is pathos, the psychological emotional appeal, or some type of emotional response. You know, a speaker may be an expert or very competent and still not be trustworthy. Dictators in the world are very charismatic. They may have a lot of information about what they believe, but they're not trustworthy. A speaker may be very trustworthy, and I don't mean a speaker like me necessarily, anyone who's talking, but they may not be competent. I never give workshops on algebra, because that wasn't my strong suit. And I tell people that, oh, I could talk about almost anything given enough time, but not algebra. So I can be very entertaining, but I can get out there and do research and come up with valid information, but I wouldn't be competent in that. So we need to recognize that when it's happening. Sometimes people are competent in one area, but they're not competent in another. And we usually see that right away in a speaker. The next is discriminative listening. Now, discriminative listening is really ingrained in all the other types of listening. There's a little bit of it in everything. Because it's the ability to be sensitive to how quickly or slowly someone is speaking. Are they talking to you really loud? Or are they talking to you like this and you can't hear them? What is their emphasis? Do they pause to make a point? And other verbal and non-verbal cues. Anybody want to throw out some example of non-verbal cues when they're listening to someone talk?
A head nod.
A head nod, yeah. Anything else?
Eye contact.
Eye contact, absolutely. Leaning in to listen, very good.
How about like a smile or like a frown or a smile?
A frown or a smile, yeah. Whatever happens on the face is very important. If you're sharing with someone that your cat just died, they start laughing. Right? We have a little problem with communication. Oh, that's an extreme. Love that. Anyway, so we're looking for differences. For example, the differences between sounds may be certain instruments you hear in an orchestra. I used to take my son to Fiddlesticks. You know, those great concerts they have for kids down in Heinz Hall. They're really wonderful. They're about an hour long, and they always have arts and crafts. And we would sit there and be listening to the entire symphony, and he would hear the triangle. Everyone has better discriminatory listening abilities in one area more than another. So here's some considerations for discriminative listening. Awareness of sound structure. See that long word up there? I'd like you all to write down on your piece of paper what you see. It's a sentence. Write down the sentence as you see it. Don't talk about it, just write it down.